When Beatrice walked into the Duke of Dalmore's study that morning, she was not looking for his approval. She was not looking for his respect, his protection, or his blessing. She was there because her father had served that house for 20 years, and now he was gone, and the office was hers, and the contracts were hers, and every debt and secret the Dalmore family had trusted to one man's silence was now sitting in a leather case under her arm. She set it on his desk. He looked at the case, then at her. Then, with the expression of a man who has never once been surprised and does not intend to start, he said, "She will never survive in this world." To her, to the man standing beside him, as if she were not in the room. Beatrice picked up the case, walked to the door, and said without turning, "Then it is fortunate, Your Grace, that I have no interest in surviving, only in winning." She closed the door behind her. The Duke of Dalmore said nothing, which, for a man who always had something to say, was already a beginning. Chapter 1. The Office. The Duke of Dalmore said 7 words that morning. Beatrice spent the next 6 months making him regret every single one. The office smelled like her father. Old paper, leather, and the particular ink he used for contracts. The kind that dried slow and left a faint smell on your fingers for hours after. She noticed it the moment she pushed open the door, and she stood there for a second longer than she intended, her hand still on the handle, her coat still buttoned against the cold outside. She decided, standing there, that she was not going to cry about it. Not here, not today. She had things to do. She set her bag on the chair by the window, her father's chair, the one with the worn armrest on the left where he always rested his elbow. And she did not sit in it. Not yet. Instead, she went straight to the desk and opened the first drawer, the way she always did when she came to meet him here, and found it exactly as he left it. Pen on the right, seal on the left, a small stack of blank paper in the center, squared at the edges. Her father believed that a man's desk told you everything about how he thought. She believed he was right. She pulled out the chair, sat down, and got to work. The Dalmore file was the thickest in the cabinet. She already knew that. She went through every file in the 2 weeks since the funeral, organizing, cataloging, understanding the full shape of what her father left behind. Most of it was straightforward. Merchant disputes, land surveys, correspondence that needed answering, retainer agreements that needed renewing. She could handle all of it. The Dalmore file was different. 20 years of history between her father and the most powerful duchy in the county. Contracts she recognized, agreements she understood. And, underneath all of it, a pattern she was still turning over in her mind. Small things, individually unremarkable, that added up to something she couldn't quite name yet. She read it again that morning, slowly, with a cup of tea that went cold beside her. She knew things about the Dalmore estate that the Duke himself probably didn't. That thought didn't give her satisfaction. It gave her a plan. The meeting was at 10. She arrived at 11 minutes to. The butler who opened the door looked at her the way people look at something unexpected. Not rude, exactly, just unprepared. She gave him her card, plain, no embellishment, just her name and the office address, and waited in the entrance hall while he disappeared with it. The hall was cold. Stone walls that never quite learned to hold heat. A clock ticked somewhere she couldn't see. The portraits on the wall all had the same jaw, firm, slightly set, the expression of people who considered certainty a birthright. The Dalmore jaw, apparently a family commitment across generations. She didn't fidget. She trained herself out of it years ago. when she realized that fidgeting was the thing that made people think they could wait you out. The butler returned, led her through 2 corridors and a sitting room that smelled of cold ash and old wood, and stopped at a door at the far end of the hall. He opened it without knocking, which told her something. There were 2 men in the room. She recognized Caspian Dalmore immediately, not because she saw him before, but because he stood in the center of the room the way men stand when they consider every room theirs. Tall, dark coat, controlled stillness, the composure of a man who decided a long time ago that showing what he felt was a form of losing. The other man was older, slight, a solicitor by the look of him, the posture of someone who spent his life standing slightly behind more important people. Caspian looked at her. She looked at him. She crossed the room, set the leather case on the table, her father's case, brass clasp, slight resistance on the left side, and said, "Good morning, Your Grace. I'm Beatrice. I believe you have matters that require attention." A silence followed. Not long, just enough to be deliberate. "Your father's associate will be taking over the file," Caspian said. Not a question, a correction delivered in advance. "My father had no associate," Beatrice said. "He had me." The solicitor shifted. Caspian didn't move at all. "The nature of this work," he started. "The retainer agreement," she said, and opened the case, "is still active. The terms don't specify a person by name. They specify the office." She placed the document on the table, turned it toward him, and tapped the relevant clause once. "I am the office now." He looked at the document, read it. She watched him read it, the slight tension at the corner of his jaw, the moment he reached the clause and understood that she was correct. He looked up. Then, without raising his voice, without heat, the way a man states something he considers simply factual, he turned to the solicitor beside him and said, "She will never survive in this world. Not to her, about her. As if she were a piece of furniture that recently developed an opinion." Beatrice closed the case, picked it up, walked to the door, and said without turning, "I don't require your world, Your Grace. I'm building my own." She closed the door behind her. Not hard, not soft. Just closed it. Outside, the cold was immediate. She walked to the end of the street, turned the corner, and stopped. Pressed her back against the wall, breathed once, slowly, deliberately, and then straightened her coat and kept walking. Her hands were perfectly still. She made them that way on purpose. She had 3 clients to write to before noon, a land registry letter to draft before the end of the week, and a retainer agreement to review that had nothing to do with Caspian Dalmore or his 7 words, or the particular way he looked at her when she placed that document on his table. She focused on that instead. The Duke of Dalmore could have the rest of the morning to feel certain about things. It was, she decided, probably the last quiet morning he was going to get. Back at the office, she made a fresh pot of tea, sat at her father's desk, her desk now, she was going to have to start thinking of it that way, and opened the ledger to the first clean page. She wrote the date at the top. Then she wrote underneath it, in her father's same careful hand, because she learned it from him without meaning to. Dalmore, active, handle with care. She looked at it for a moment. Then she added, in smaller writing just below, his error, my advantage. She closed the ledger, picked up her pen, and started on the first letter. She was still at the desk 3 hours later when she found it. Tucked inside the Dalmore file, between a land survey and a correspondence letter she already read twice, was an envelope she never saw before. Small, white, her father's handwriting on the front, her name. She sat very still. Then she picked it up, turned it over, and noticed that it wasn't sealed. It was already opened. Chapter 2. The letter. The envelope sat on the desk all night. Beatrice told herself she was too busy to open it. That was not entirely true. She opened it the next morning, coffee in hand, coat still on, the kind of early that felt less like a choice and more like a consequence of not sleeping well. The fire was low. She lit it when she arrived, but did not feed it properly. And the office was cold in the specific way that offices are cold when they haven't been lived in long enough to warm up yet. She sat at the desk and read. Her father's handwriting was careful, the way it always was with things that mattered. No flourish, no preamble. Just the facts, organized the way he organized everything. By order of importance, not by order of comfort. The letter said 3 things. First, the Dalmore file contained a clause no one mentioned to her. A clause her father wrote himself 12 years ago, at the request of the previous Duke, Caspian's father. A clause that, if activated, gave the office the right to audit the estate's land agreements going back 30 years. Second, someone already tried to remove that clause. Her father noticed. He kept the original and said nothing. Third, and this was the part she read twice. Be careful, B. The current Duke doesn't know it exists, but someone else does. And that someone has been inside this office. She set the letter down, picked up the coffee, drank it without tasting it. Her father was meticulous. She knew that, grew up watching it, inherited it whether she meant to or not. But he was also, she understood now, quietly brave in a way he never talked about. The kind of brave that doesn't announce itself. The kind that just keeps showing up to work every morning and doing the right thing without making a performance of it. She folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and locked it in the drawer on the left, the one with the small brass key she moved to her coat pocket immediately after. Then she opened the Dalmore file and started looking for the clause. She found it on page 47. Her father's hand, tucked between 2 standard land survey agreements, formatted to look like a routine addendum. Easy to miss if you were moving fast, impossible to miss if you weren't. She was not moving fast. She read it 3 times. Then she sat back in the chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, which was something she did when she needed to think and didn't want the distraction of anything in front of her. The clause was precise, specific, written by a man who understood exactly what he was doing and why it might one day matter. If the current Duke knew about it, he would want it enforced or destroyed. She wasn't sure which, and that uncertainty was itself useful information. If the person who tried to remove it knew she found it, that was a different problem entirely. She decided to do nothing. For now. Some things needed thinking before they needed doing. She closed the file, squared it at the edges the way her father always did, and put it back in the cabinet. Then she made a second pot of coffee, sat down at the desk, and started on the morning's correspondence as if page 47 didn't exist. She was, her father once told her, the best actress in a family that produced no actresses. She took it as a compliment. She was fairly certain he meant it as one. The first client arrived at 11. Mr. Aldous Finch, textile imports, referred by a woman whose letter of introduction suggested genuine confidence rather than polite obligation. He was nervous in the way that men are nervous when they need help but haven't decided yet whether to trust the person offering it. He looked at her, at the office, at her again. "Your father," he started. "Is gone," she said. Not unkind. Just clear. "I am aware this is an adjustment. You are welcome to take the file elsewhere. If you stay, I will tell you in the next 10 minutes whether your contract dispute has merit. Most solicitors take 3 weeks to reach that conclusion. I charge the same rate my father did." Mr. Finch blinked. Then he sat down. The dispute had merit. She told him so in 8 minutes, identified the specific breach in 2 more, and outlined 3 approaches before he finished his tea. He left with the look of a man who came in expecting one thing and encountered something considerably different. Not worse, just different. She wrote his name in the client ledger after he left. Neat, unhurried, the way her father taught her. A name in the ledger was a commitment, not just a record. The second client canceled by messenger. The third didn't show at all. She used the time to write 4 letters, 2 to solicitors she needed information from, 1 to a land registry office, and 1 to a name that appeared 3 times in her father's private correspondence in a way that felt deliberate, without being obvious. She wasn't sure what she was looking for yet. But her father taught her that patterns existed before you named them, and the job was to keep looking until the name arrived on its own. The office was quiet in the afternoon. The fire settled into something low and steady, and the light through the window went the gray that London light goes in winter, not dark exactly, just decided. As if the sky made up its mind about something and wasn't interested in discussing it. She liked the quiet. Most people filled silence because they didn't know what to do with it. Beatrice learned early that silence was where the useful things lived. You just had to be willing to sit with it long enough. She was locking up for the evening when she heard the footsteps. The street was nearly empty, a carriage at the far end moving slowly, a man with a newspaper tucked under his arm, crossing toward the other side. The footsteps came from behind her, deliberate, unhurried. Someone not trying to get somewhere so much as watching someone else get there. She didn't turn around immediately. When she did, there was no one there. Just the street. The cold. The feeling of a space where someone recently stood. A stillness that was 1 degree too still. She looked at the office door. Locked, undisturbed. The window above it dark. She stood there a moment with her keys in her hand, thinking about her father's letter and the word careful, and the fact that someone already entered this office once, without her knowing. Then she went home. She checked the lock twice. Then, halfway down the street, went back and checked it a 3rd time. She was not, generally speaking, the kind of person who checked locks 3 times. She noted that, filed it away, kept walking. That night, at the small desk in her rooms, she went back through the Dalmore correspondence, not the clause, but the letters, the ones between her father and the previous Duke. The margin notes her father wrote to himself in pencil, small and precise, when something didn't sit right with him. There were 3 such notes in the file. All 3 pointed to the same name, a name she recognized from the letters she read that afternoon. A name that appeared in the office correspondence just 4 weeks ago, after her father was already gone, addressed to no one specific, as if whoever sent it wasn't sure yet who would be reading it. She stared at it for a long time. Then she heard it. A sound. Small, wrong. Not from the street outside or the buildings settling the way old buildings settle at night. Closer than that, specific. She looked up from the desk. The door to the back room was open. She was certain she closed it. Chapter 3. The name. The back room was empty. That was almost worse. She stood in the doorway for a moment, candle in hand, and looked at everything inside it. Filing cabinet, stack of boxes she did not open yet, a small window, latched from the inside. Nothing moved. Nothing looked disturbed. The room smelled of old paper and cold air and nothing else. She checked the window anyway. Still latched. She went back to her desk, sat down, and looked at the open door for a while. Then she got up, closed it, and wedged the spare chair under the handle. Not because she was afraid, because she was practical. There was a difference, and she found it useful to remember which was which. She didn't sleep well. The next morning she wrote a letter to Mr. Silas Grundy. The name from the file. The one that appeared 3 times in her father's margin notes, and once in a letter sent to the office 4 weeks after her father died. She kept the letter simple, professional, direct, the kind that gave nothing away but required a response. She said she was reviewing correspondence from the previous months and had some questions regarding a matter related to the Dalmore estate. She sent it before she could think too hard about it. Then she made coffee, opened the ledger, and got on with the day. 2 new clients came that week. A widow named Mrs. Horton, sharp, impatient, and entirely correct about the property dispute she brought in, and a young merchant called Mr. Declan Reeve, who arrived 15 minutes late, apologized 4 times, and turned out to have a surprisingly complicated situation involving a broken supply contract and a partner who disappeared to Edinburgh without explanation. She liked them both. Mrs. Horton because she didn't waste words. Mr. Reeve because he was honest about what he didn't understand, which in her experience was rarer than it should have been. She wrote both names in the ledger. Word was moving, she noticed. Slowly, the way word moves in a city that runs on reputation, not loud, not fast, but persistent. 2 of her father's clients renewed their retainers without being asked. A third sent a referral with a note that said simply, "Your father would be pleased." She put that note in the drawer on the right, not the locked one, just the regular drawer, where she kept things she wanted to remember without having to think about why. She was with Mrs. Horton on Thursday afternoon when the knock came. Not the front door, the side entrance, the one that opened directly into the corridor beside the back room. She used it herself sometimes when she arrived early. Most people didn't know it existed. Mrs. Horton stopped mid-sentence. Beatrice held up one hand, just a moment, and went to the corridor. She opened the door. Caspian Dalmore stood on the other side. No butler, no solicitor, no calling card sent ahead. Just him, coat slightly damp from the weather outside, and the expression of a man who made a decision he hasn't entirely forgiven himself for yet. She looked at him. He looked at her. "I need to speak with you," he said. "I have a client." "I know. I'll wait." That was unexpected. She didn't let it show. She opened the door a little wider, gestured toward the chair in the corridor, and went back to Mrs. Horton, who raised one very precise eyebrow and said nothing at all, which was somehow more eloquent than anything she could have said. Mrs. Horton left 20 minutes later. She paused at the corridor on her way out, looked at Caspian with the assessment of a woman who has encountered many powerful men and found most of them unremarkable, and then looked back at Beatrice with an expression that communicated several things at once, without any of them being spoken aloud. Beatrice ignored all of them. She led Caspian into the office, sat behind the desk, and waited. He didn't sit immediately. He looked at the room first. The shelves, the files, the desk, the small details that accumulate in a space when someone actually works in it rather than performs working in it. She watched him look and said nothing. Then he sat. "There is a situation," he said. "There usually is," she said. When people come to a solicitor's office, that tends to be why. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, more like a word that decided not to become one. A land agreement, he said. 3 parcels on the northern edge of the estate. There is a dispute with an adjacent landowner, Lord Pembury, regarding boundary lines. It went to arbitration last year, and the arbitrator ruled against Dalmore. My solicitors in London say the ruling was correct. But you don't think it was, Beatrice said. He looked at her. No, I don't. Why not? Because the original survey from 40 years ago places the boundary line 40 feet further north than the arbitrator's ruling. My solicitors say the survey is invalid. I say it is. Beatrice was quiet for a moment. She knew about this. Not because she read it recently, because she read everything in that file, including a survey from 40 years ago that she noted at the time and set aside for reasons she couldn't fully articulate yet. She got up, went to the cabinet, and pulled the Dalmore file. She found the survey in 4 minutes, set it on the desk in front of him. He looked at it, then at her. You already knew, he said. I read the file. All of it. It's my job. Another silence. Different from the ones before, less defensive, more considering. She could almost see him recalibrate, the way people recalibrate when they realize the ground shifted slightly under them without their permission. Can you prove the survey is valid? He asked. I don't know yet, she said. I need 3 days and access to the land registry records from that period. If the survey holds, the arbitration ruling can be challenged. If it doesn't hold... She paused. Then your London solicitors were right, and this conversation never happened. He nodded once, slowly. 3 days, he said. 3 days. He stood, reached for his coat. And then, because the room was quiet and she wasn't looking at him anymore, already making a note in the margin of the file, he said, My mother spoke of your father often. She said he was the only solicitor in England who told my father the truth, even when the truth was inconvenient. Beatrice kept writing. He was, she said. It's a family trait. She heard him leave. The side door, not the front. The same way he came in. She sat for a moment after he left, pen still in hand, and noticed that the room felt slightly different than it did before he walked into it. She noted that too. Filed it under things she wasn't going to think about yet. The response from Silas Grundy arrived the following morning. 1 line. No greeting, no signature. You should leave the Dalmore file alone, Miss Voss, for your own sake. She read it once, set it on the desk, poured herself a coffee. Then she pulled the Dalmore file back out, opened it to page 47, and got to work. Some people made the mistake of thinking a warning would slow her down. It never did. If anything, it told her she was looking in exactly the right place. Chapter 4. The survey. 3 days was what she promised. She needed 2. The land registry office on Chancery Lane smelled of dust and authority, the combination that accumulates in buildings where important papers live long enough that the papers start to believe they run the place. Beatrice arrived when it opened and stayed until the clerk made it clear, with increasing politeness, that she was the last person in the building and he had somewhere to be. She found what she needed on the second day. The original survey, the one from 40 years ago, the one that placed the Dalmore boundary line 40 feet further north, was registered. Properly. With a surveyor's seal and a witness signature, and a date that preceded the adjacent landowner's claim by 11 years. The arbitrator's ruling wasn't wrong because the law was wrong. It was wrong because someone presented an incomplete set of records, Whether that was incompetence or something more deliberate, she couldn't say yet. She made copies, careful, exact, the way her father taught her. A copy is only useful if it's indistinguishable from the original in every detail that matters. Then she went back to the office, made tea, and sat down to think about Silas Grundy. She went to see him herself. She knew it wasn't the most cautious approach. She also knew that caution had its limits as a strategy, and that sometimes the most useful thing you could do was simply walk through a door and see what happened on the other side. Grundy's office was 3 streets east, a narrow building pressed between a tailor and a print shop, chosen for inconspicuousness rather than prestige. The sign on the door said S. Grundy, Property Counsel, in letters that someone painted with more confidence than skill. She knocked. He answered himself, which told her something. No clerk, no assistant. An office that looked busier than it functioned. Silas Grundy was older than she expected. 60s, perhaps. A narrow face, careful eyes. A man who spent a long time being useful to people who preferred not to be named in connection with what they needed done. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Miss Voss," he said, not surprised. Which meant he knew she was coming, which meant he was watching the office, which confirmed several things she already suspected. "Mr. Grundy," she said, "I got your letter. I thought it would be more efficient to continue the conversation in person." He stood back and let her in. The office was cold. One window, facing a wall. A desk with too many papers arranged in a way that suggested disorder but was probably deliberate. She sat in the chair across from him without being invited and placed her bag on her lap. "You worked with my father," she said, "occasionally. On Dalmore matters." A pause. "Among others." "He trusted you," she said. "Or he trusted you enough to copy you on certain correspondence. That's not the same thing. But it's something." Grundy looked at his desk, then at her. "Your father was a careful man." He was. He was also careful enough to keep originals of documents that other people wanted removed. She let that sit for a moment. "I found the clause, Mr. Grundy. And I found the survey. And I found your name in 3 margin notes that my father wrote to himself when something didn't feel right." The room was very quiet. "What is it you want, Miss Voss?" "Information," she said. "Specifically, who asked you to remove the clause, and why?" Grundy was silent for a long moment. Outside, a cart moved slowly down the street, wheels loud on the stone. Inside, the clock on the wall marked the seconds. "I didn't remove it," he said finally. "I was asked to. I declined." "Who asked?" He looked at her for a long moment. A man weighing something that has been heavy for a long time. "Lord Pembury," he said. Beatrice was quiet. Lord Pembury, the adjacent landowner, the man who won the arbitration ruling against Dalmore. He presented incomplete records to the arbitrator, records that were incomplete because someone asked Grundy to remove a clause, and someone else made sure the land registry submission left out the full documentation. "He presented incomplete records to the arbitrator," she said. "That is not something I can confirm. But it's not something you're denying." Grundy said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. She stood, picked up her bag, and walked to the door. "One more thing," she said, without turning. "The letter you sent me. The warning." "Yes." "Was that Pembury's instruction or your own initiative?" A long pause. "My own," he said. "Your father was a good man. Didn't want his daughter walking into something she didn't understand. She turned at that, looked at him. "I understand it perfectly, Mr. Grundy," she said. "That's what worries you." She left. She sent a message to Caspian that afternoon. Formal, brief. The kind of note a solicitor sends a client when she has results and requires a meeting. Nothing more, nothing less. She gave him a time and asked him to come to the office rather than the other way around. It was a small thing, but it mattered. If he was going to understand what she found, he needed to understand it in the right room. He arrived on time. She noticed that. She laid the documents on the desk in order: the original survey, the registry records, the arbitration filing, and a one-page summary she wrote that morning that laid out exactly what happened and in what sequence. She talked him through it. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask unnecessary questions, just listened, which she appreciated more than she expected to. She was used to men who asked questions when they were confused, and questions when they were uncomfortable, and questions when they simply couldn't tolerate the experience of someone else holding the information for too long. Caspian listened. When she finished, he looked at the documents for a moment. Then he said, "Pembari presented false records to the arbitrator." "Incomplete records," she said. "Whether that rises to false depends on intent, and intent is harder to prove than omission." "Can the ruling be overturned?" "Yes. With this survey and the registry documentation, you have grounds to appeal. It won't be fast. It won't be quiet. Pemberry will push back." "Let him." She looked at him. He looked at her. There was something different in it. Not the look from the first morning, the one that went through her like she wasn't quite there. This one landed differently. The look of a man revising something he thought he already settled. "You did this in 3 days," he said. 2, actually. He was quiet for a moment. "I owe you an apology," he said. The words came out with the stiffness of a man for whom apology is not a well-worn path. "What I said the morning you came to the house, it was said without thought. It was said in front of your solicitor," she said. "That suggests some thought." "It suggests habit," he said. "Which is worse?" She looked at him for a moment. He meant it. She could tell the difference between a man managing a situation and a man saying something true. This was the second one. "The apology is noted," she said. "Now, about the appeal." Ah, ah. She turned back to the documents. She felt him watch her do it. He was almost at the door when it opened from the outside. A man she didn't recognize, well-dressed, confident in the way that people are confident when they consider most rooms beneath them, stepped in without knocking, saw Caspian, and stopped. Then he saw Beatrice. His expression changed. "Dalmore," he said. His voice was easy, practiced, a man very good at being in rooms he wasn't supposed to be in. "I didn't realize you were engaged." "Lord Pembury," Caspian said. The name landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Pembury looked at the documents on the desk, at Beatrice, at Caspian. And in the space of about 3 seconds, she watched him understand exactly what was on that desk and exactly what it meant for him. His expression didn't change. That was the most interesting part. "I'll call another time," he said pleasantly, and left. The door clicked shut behind him. The room was very quiet. Caspian looked at Beatrice. "He knew," she said. "Yes." "He came to see what you knew." "Yes." She looked at the documents on the desk. then at the door, then back at Caspian. "He'll move fast now," she said. "Then we move faster," Caspian said. She noticed afterward that he said we. She filed that away too, in the drawer she was running out of space in. Chapter 5. The Distance. The problem with Caspian Dalmore was not that he was difficult. The problem was that he was starting to make sense. She noticed it first on a Tuesday. He came to the office 3 times that week, once for the appeal documentation, once to review the registry submission, and once on Friday afternoon, for reasons he explained as a follow-up on the Pembury timeline. Neither of them believed that explanation. She didn't say that. He didn't either. They worked at opposite ends of the desk, she with the registry copies, he with the correspondence from his London solicitors. The office was quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when 2 people are pretending to concentrate harder than they actually are. At some point, she looked up and found him looking at her. He looked back down immediately. She looked back down too. Neither of them mentioned it. The appeal moved quickly, faster than she expected. The registry documentation was clean. The original survey held under scrutiny. She filed the challenge through the proper channels, copied the relevant parties, and drafted a letter to the arbitration board that was precise enough to be irrefutable and restrained enough not to embarrass anyone more than strictly necessary. Her father taught her that. You can be right without making a man feel destroyed by it. The ones you destroy become enemies. The ones you leave with their dignity intact sometimes become allies. She thought about Caspian more than she planned to those weeks. That was a separate matter she was not going to examine too closely. Mrs. Horton came back with a second matter. A tenant dispute, complicated, the kind that required patience more than brilliance. Mr. Reeves' Edinburgh situation resolved in his favor, and he sent flowers to the office with a note that said, "I told my mother about you, and she wants to know if you take family cases." Beatrice wrote back and said yes, within reason, and decided she would know what counted as within reason when she saw it. 2 more new clients came that month, then 3. The ledger was filling up. She ordered a second one before the first was finished, because her father always said that running out of ledger space mid-month was the kind of thing that happened to people who didn't pay attention. She was paying attention. On a Wednesday evening, later than she usually stayed, she was finishing the Pembury response documents when she heard the side door. She knew his knock by then. She wasn't sure when that happened. "Come in," she said, without looking up. Caspian came in, coat damp. It had been raining since afternoon, and sat in the chair across the desk without being invited, which he stopped waiting to be after the second week. "The response to Pembury's counter-filing," she said. "He moved faster than I expected. His solicitors are good." "Better than mine?" "Different," she said. "Yours are thorough. His are creative. Creativity is harder to anticipate." He was quiet for a moment. "Can you anticipate it?" "I already did." She turned the document toward him. "Page 3. I addressed the argument he hasn't made yet. When he makes it, and he will, probably within the fortnight, we'll already have the counter on record." He read it. She watched him without making it obvious. The way you watch something you're trying to understand, without admitting you find it worth understanding. "You think like him," Caspian said. "I think like everyone," she said. "It's useful." He looked up from the document. "Does it ever get exhausting?" The question surprised her, not because it was inappropriate, it wasn't, but because it was genuine. No agenda. Just a person wanting to know something about another person. She considered it honestly. "Sometimes," she said. But the alternative is thinking like no one, which is its own kind of lonely. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at the document. She looked back at hers. The fire crackled once and settled. The rain continued against the window. Neither of them said anything for a while. It was a comfortable silence. That was new. The letter from Lord Pembury arrived on a Thursday. Not to the office. To her rooms on Carey Street, which meant he knew where she lived, which was, she acknowledged, the point. The letter was polite. Too polite. The kind of polite that is actually a different word entirely. He expressed admiration for her work and respect for her father's legacy. He hoped she understood the complexity of the matters she was engaged in. He mentioned, in passing, that certain information regarding her father's financial arrangements might benefit from a closer examination. He wished her well. She read it twice. Then she put it in the locked drawer with the other letter and sat for a moment, looking at the wall. Her father's financial arrangements were unremarkable. There was nothing to find. But that wasn't the point. Pembury was telling her he was willing to manufacture something. A cloud over her father's name. A question that didn't need to be answered to do damage. It just needed to be asked publicly. She knew how that worked. She also knew that stopping was not something she was built for. She was still thinking about it when she found Caspian waiting outside the office door that evening. No meeting scheduled. No message sent ahead. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, with the expression of a man who made a decision and arrived before he could change his mind. "I heard about the letter," he said. She stopped. "How?" Pembury told someone who told someone. He wanted it known. He paused. "Are you all right?" Such a direct question. No preamble, no formality. She looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said. "Beatrice." Her name, not Miss Voss. Said plainly, the way you say someone's name when you need them to stop performing and just answer. She looked at him. "No," she said. "Not entirely." He nodded, like he knew that already and just needed her to say it. "Come inside," she said. "There are things we need to discuss." She unlocked the door. He followed her in. Neither of them noticed that he closed the door behind him the way a person closes a door when they intend to stay for a while. She made her decision alone, later that night, after he left. She sat at the desk in the dark. She forgot to relight the lamp. She thought about Pembury's letter, about her father's name, about the clause on page 47, about the way Caspian said Beatrice like it was a word he already knew the weight of. Then she opened the locked drawer, took out both letters, and read them side by side. Her father's letter said, "Be careful, B." Pembury's letter said, "Stop." She put them both back, locked the drawer, picked up her pen, and began drafting the most precise, irrefutable legal challenge she ever wrote. The kind that didn't leave room for creativity or interpretation or manufactured questions about anyone's father. She worked until 2 in the morning. She did not feel tired once. What she didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, sitting alone in that office in the dark, was that 3 streets away, Caspian Dalmore sat at his own desk and wrote a letter. Not to his London solicitors, not to the arbitration board, to his mother. It said, "I need your advice on a matter that has nothing to do with the estate." He sealed it, set it aside. Then he sat for a long time, looking at nothing in particular. For a man who always had somewhere to look, that told her enough. Chapter 6. The Bow. The arbitration board met on a Friday. Beatrice wore her father's coat, not because it fit well. It didn't. The coat was made for a man much taller than her and considerably broader. But she altered it herself the week before, with the stubbornness of someone who has decided a thing will work and is prepared to make it work by force of will if necessary. It fit well enough. She arrived early, sat in the anteroom with her documents squared on her lap, and her hands still and her face arranged in the expression she used for rooms that were about to underestimate her. She was good at that expression. She had a lot of practice. The board was 5 men. She researched all 5 the week before. Know the room before you walk into it, her father always said, because people decide who you are before you even speak. They looked at her when she entered. The look of men who have seen many things in this room and are uncertain which category she belongs to. She sat down, opened her folio, and said, "Good morning, I'll be brief." One of them, Chairman Alderton, silver-haired, the kind of man who considered patience a personal virtue and punctuality a moral failing in others, looked at her over his glasses. "Miss Voss," he said, "you represent the Dalmore estate." "I do." "In what capacity?" "Solicitor." She said it without inflection, not defensive, not performative, just the word, sitting there, taking up exactly the space it was entitled to. Alderton looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at his papers. "Very well," he said. "Proceed." She talked for 40 minutes. Not because she needed 40 minutes. She could have made the essential argument in 15. But the essential argument needed context, and the context needed documentation, and the documentation needed to be understood, not just in the mind, but in the gut. The way a room understands something when it realizes it cannot look away from what it just saw. She walked them through the original survey, the registration date, the 11-year gap between the Dalmore filing and the adjacent claim, the arbitration submission that omitted. She used that word carefully, precisely, without accusation. The registry documentation that would have changed the ruling. She placed each document on the table as she reached it, in order, squared at the edges. When she finished, the room was quiet. Alderton looked at the documents, at the man beside him, at the documents again. "The original survey," he said, "was registered." "Yes." "And the arbitration submission did not include it." "It did not." "That is a significant omission." "It is," she said. "I trust the board will determine the appropriate characterization of how that omission occurred." She was not going to say the word deliberate in this room. She didn't need to. She could see it moving across their faces like weather. Pembury's solicitors were given time to respond. They were good. She already knew that. Creative. They questioned the survey's chain of custody, raised procedural objections to the appeal timeline, and suggested, with considerable elegance, that the omission was an administrative error rather than anything more consequential. She anticipated all 3 arguments. She addressed them in order, calmly, specifically, with documentation for each one, because she learned from her father that the only argument you can't counter is the one that's already on paper before you need it. By the time she finished the 3rd rebuttal, Pembury's lead solicitor had the look of a man who arrived expecting a discussion and found a wall instead. She almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The board recessed for deliberation. She went back to the anteroom, sat in the same chair, squared the documents on her lap again, mostly because it gave her hands something to do. Caspian was there. She did not see him come in. He sat 2 chairs away, coat on, still in the way he went still when he decided to wait something out. She looked at him. "You didn't tell me you were coming," she said. "You didn't ask. This isn't something you needed to be present for." "I know," he said. She looked at him for a moment. He looked at her, and there was something in it. Not the first look from that morning in his study, the one that went through her like she was furniture. Not even the look from the office, the one that landed differently. This one was something else. A man who stopped pretending he doesn't know what he's looking at. She looked back at her documents. The clock on the wall ticked. "My mother wrote back," he said. "About what?" "I asked her advice on a matter." "What matter?" A pause. "She said," he continued, "that the last time my father asked her advice on a matter that had nothing to do with the estate, he was asking about her." Beatrice was very still. "That's quite a thing for your mother to say," she said. "She's quite a woman," he said. "You'd get on well. You make a point the same way, without raising your voice." She said nothing. He said nothing. The clock ticked. And then, because the room was quiet and her hands were still and she was running out of things to look at that weren't him, she said, "The case will hold. The ruling will be overturned. Whatever happens in that room, the work is done. It was always going to hold." "I know," he said. "That's not why I'm here." She looked at him. He looked at her. "Beatrice." He said her name again. Just her name. With the weight of a man who has been carrying something for a while and decided, finally, to set it down. "I said something unforgivable the morning you came to my house. In front of a man who had no business hearing it. About a woman who did nothing to deserve it." "You apologized," she said. "I noted it." "I know you noted it. That's not the same as accepting it." She was quiet. "I don't require," she started. "I know what you require," he said. "You've made that very clear. You don't require my world. You don't require my approval. You don't require anything from anyone that you haven't already decided to get for yourself." He paused. "I'm not offering you something you require. I'm offering you something I should have offered from the beginning. The acknowledgement that I was wrong. Completely. Specifically. In a way that I intend not to repeat." The anteroom was very quiet. Outside, somewhere down the corridor, a door opened and closed. She looked at him for a long moment. "You were wrong," she said. "Yes." "Completely." "Yes." "And you intend not to repeat it." With considerable conviction, he said. Something shifted. Not dramatic, not sudden. The way light shifts when a cloud moves. The same room, but different quality to everything in it. She almost smiled. She let herself, just slightly. "The board will be back shortly," she said. "I know. You should probably look like you're here for professional reasons." "I probably should," he agreed. He didn't move. Neither did she. The board returned in 40 minutes. Chairman Alderton read the finding in the flat, careful tone of a man delivering a verdict he has no personal stake in. The original survey was valid. The arbitration ruling was overturned. The boundary line would be re-established in accordance with the registered documentation. The question of the omission would be referred for further review. She wrote "referred for further review" in her notes and underlined it once. That was Pembrey's problem now. A slow, formal, very public problem. She closed her folio, stood, turned. Caspian was already standing. He looked at her with the expression of a man who wants to say something and is deciding whether the anteroom of an arbitration board is the right place to say it. She made the decision for him. "Walk with me," she said. "I need air." Outside, London moved the way it always does in the early afternoon. Indifferent, unbothered, carrying on without any concern for what just happened in a room on its third floor. They walked for half a block without speaking. Then Caspian stopped. She stopped too. He looked at her directly. No managed composure, no careful stillness. Just him in a street in London on a Friday afternoon, looking at her like she was the most specific thing in a very large city. And then, slowly, deliberately, with the full awareness of what he was doing, he inclined his head. Not a formal bow, not a social gesture. Something smaller and more precise. An acknowledgement that has nothing to do with protocol and everything to do with meaning it. The first bow. His. She looked at him for a long moment. "You're going to make this complicated," she said. "Probably," he said. "I find I don't mind." He took one step toward her. Just one. Unhurried. She didn't move back. He said her name then, not Miss Voss. Not with any title attached to it. Just Beatrice. The way you say a name when you stop pretending it doesn't mean something. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she closed the distance herself. It was not a dramatic kiss. Not the kind that announces itself. It was the kind that happens when two people circle something long enough. When it finally arrives, it doesn't feel like a beginning. It feels like something that was always going to happen. His hand came up to her face. Careful, certain. She let herself stay there a moment longer than necessary. When she stepped back, London was still moving around them. Indifferent as ever, entirely unbothered. "Well," she said. "Well," he agreed. She looked at him. He looked at her. She started walking again. He fell into step beside her. Neither of them said anything for a while. The city moved around them. The afternoon light did what it does in London when it decides to behave. Pale and clear and just enough. It was, she thought, a beginning. A real one. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that's already been happening for a while before you notice. She noticed now. Epilogue. 3 months later. The wedding was small, exactly as long as it needed to be. Not 1 minute longer, which suited them both, and surprised no one who knew either of them. Lady Dalmore cried. She considered crying in public a personal failure. She decided this once was worth it. Mrs. Horton attended and did not cry. She said afterward it was the most sensible wedding she witnessed in 40 years. From Mrs. Horton, that was the highest possible praise. Mr. Reeves' mother brought flowers from her garden. She pressed them into Beatrice's hands without a word, then looked at her and said, "Your father would have been very proud." Beatrice thanked her. Then she looked away for a moment, at the window, at the light coming through it, and gave herself exactly 5 seconds. Then she turned back. A few weeks after that, on a Tuesday morning, naturally, she was at the desk when Caspian came in through the side door. No knock. He stopped doing that sometime in February. He set a cup of tea beside her without a word. The right temperature, the right amount. Because he learned both without being told. He sat across from her with the correspondence she left for him the night before. She looked at the tea, then at him. He was already reading, coat still on, one hand turning a page, entirely at home in a room that was not his. Somehow, it became partly his anyway. That's what happens when you keep showing up. She picked up her pen. He turned a page. The fire crackled once and settled. Outside, London moved the way it always moved. Indifferent, loud, unbothered. Inside, the office was warm. That was enough. That was everything. She never did require his world. She just ended up rather fond of the man who came with it. Tell me, where in the world are you watching this beautiful story today? And which part touched you the most? A big hug to you, and thank you for staying until the end. Until the next story.